Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the At the Water's Edge podcast, where we look for insights beyond the headlines to take a practitioner's view on national security and geopolitics. It's the 16th of June, 2025. Let's get in. So, right now, we've got Israel and Iran bombing the crap out of each other. We've got Pakistan and India gearing up for we don't know what. All sorts of issues at the border. Supply chain issues going into China. Still on the tail end of all of Trump's tariff policies, figuring out what that's going to look like for the world. It's a bit of a complicated place. And with that, there's a very important question to ask. And that's Trump's national security strategy. Does he have one, and what the heck is it? As far as we've heard, it involves parades in Washington, D.C., sponsored by defense contractors and crypto banks. Interesting choice. Shout out to the Army 250th birthday a couple days ago. Now, to help try to understand what Trump's national security strategy is, I had a wonderful chance to have back on Dr. Jahara Matisek, professor at the U.S. Naval War College, former naval aviator, PhD from Northwestern, really smart guy. He actually wrote an article that was published by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute called Trump's National Security Strategy, from Pax Americana to Pact Americana. Now, it's been interesting to see what Trump 2.0 has been like, because in his very first administration, our Secretary of Defense was Jim Mattis, very well-respected Marine Corps general, put out a very comprehensive national security strategy in 2017 coming into office, really updated and refreshed the intellectual thinking around what America's strategy should be to secure itself, partner with allies, deter aggression, mitigate the risk from global terrorist organizations. Widely well received by the defense community. This go around, we've got Pete Hegseth, and it's been a little different. Now, granted, he's only been in office for a few months, hasn't had a full year to do a review, but we'll see what he publishes next year, if anything. It'll be interesting. So, with that, let's get to our conversation with Dr. Matisek and get his take on what Trump's current national security strategy is. All right. And hey, man, welcome back to the podcast. How you doing this afternoon?
Good to have me back, Scott. I'm happy to be here.
No, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah.
Now,
sure.
I came across a funny article and I had to go back and check who wrote it, and apparently it was you. But somebody decided to sit down and actually try to write out what Trump's national security strategy was in a way that wasn't hyperbolic and completely bloated. I was like, man, props for the attempt. Let's see what this is all about. So you recently wrote an article. Let's see if I can get this exactly right. Yes, it was published in The Strategist, a fine publication sponsored by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, titled Trump's National Security Strategy from Pax America to Pact America. And you laid out a couple of fun pillars there that was actually trying to describe Trump's national security strategy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It's been a minute since you've been on with us. So before I ask about the article, can I please ask you to introduce yourself to the audience in your own words?
Yeah, I'm Jahara Matisek. I go by my pilot call sign Frankie because I'm a big dumb animal like Frankenstein. I have a PhD in political science from Northwestern University. And I was an old cargo pilot. They got tired of being a pilot, and so I got the Air Force to pay for my PhD. And so I've been a professor at the Air Force Academy, currently now a professor at the U.S. Naval War College up there in Rhode Island, and I'm about to head off to NORTHCOM J3 here in a few months to be the Deputy Command Center Director. So I've had a very interesting, weird career, primarily because I've been able to be in academia for basically a decade, and I've written over 100 articles and 2 books. So yeah, I've had a very interesting Air Force career that everyone would tell you don't do what I've done, but I've done it somehow.
I can respect that. Back when I still thought I was going to do a full term in the Army, I was also, I didn't start this way, but I was on a very non-traditional career track. And then the med board let me know I didn't have to worry about that. But so your article, Trump's national security strategy, let's start off with this. What is Trump's national security strategy? Because as far as I can tell, it involves Qatari jets and shit coins.
I mean, so what's interesting about it, and I put it in the article, a lot of what they're going to be using is going to be that peace through strength document that was put out by a congressman about a year ago. And I have a hyperlinked in the article. And so a good chunk of it, I think, is actually going to borrow from that peace through strength. If you just go to Google and type in Congressman Peace Through Strength PDF, it'll pull up, and it looks almost like sort of like a think tank type of NSS. And again, it's kind of what I think you're actually seeing out of the Trump admin. And I appreciate that you actually noticing there being nothing hyperbolic about this, because this was probably like the 6th or 7th iteration of me writing it, because the first 2 outlets I pitched it to said, this seems kind of dangerous to publish. We don't want to do it because we feel like we might get in trouble, and we don't want you to get in trouble because you are an active duty like lieutenant colonel, which that I think maybe that makes this even more awkward that I even decided to write something that's very proactively, I suppose. But eventually I brought in a co-author who is a little bit more Republican, and is like, hey, Frankie, I can help you sort of make this a sort of like to the point, cold, detached, and unemotionless and non-judgmental. So the version you saw took a couple of months of iterations to basically say it like to basically say it like it is. And this is like the 6 pillars.
Yeah. Now, I read through it. Now I was struck by the tone, because I do know how difficult it is, especially when you're interested enough in a topic to write about it and put the research in and then publish something, to almost take your own voice out of that writing process and publish I don't want to say dry, but a disinterested document describing what you're looking at. Not that anyone is without bias, but there's various honest ways to present your perspective. So props for that. And now I'm going to do my best to try to pull you back to wherever that first draft was. So,
yeah. Which I have it pulled up on the side as well as we talk.
Oh, good. All right, let's see how much trouble I can get a lieutenant colonel in today. All right.
Oh, yeah. And these views are my own, not those of the DoD.
Disclaimer. Do the disclaimer.
And not that of the U.S. government or U.S. military or Department of Defense. So my own views.
Okay, cool. Fantastic. So you laid out, I saw that there was 6 pillars in the published document and 7 in the original. We can stick with the 6. You bring up a really interesting strategy, and it ties. We can spend the entire hour just talking about the first one. The first pillar that you bring up is that Trump is trying to do his own variation of the Monroe Doctrine, but he's trying to expand it all the way to the shores of China.
Yes.
And there seems to be a really interesting tension in that idea, because Trump is also presented as, or often presented as, and he presents himself as, a pseudo-isolationist president in the context of what we're used to since in the post-World War II era. So to see it written that he's trying to take a doctrine that was centered on North America and, well, South America too, but the Western Hemisphere, no European influence, and now he's trying to expand that doctrine but keep it focused on us. What is that? Because there seems to be an obvious contradiction there.
Yeah, so the reason why I kind of came to that conclusion is because of the fact that he brought in Elbridge Colby to be a pretty high-level Pentagon appointee, and this guy's view is very much influencing the U.S. military within the last 2-3 months of him actually getting appointed, basically getting through the whole congressional hearing. He is a big person on boxing in and containing China. So the more I looked at his writings and what he's talked about the last few years, everything that he thinks and views about how the U.S. needs to be using its scarce military resources and things like that is Europe and everything else is a waste of our time. We need to be purely focused on Asia, and with the Asia focus being containing and deterring China. So as I looked at it, I was like, holy crap. And it just seems like everything seems to be moving in that direction that we need to get control back over the Western Hemisphere, so North America and South America, and the fact that we're pulling assets to do military assets to do more things in Central South America, and that we're pushing all of this again, all towards the Indo-Pacific, sort of like towards this, this big fight that we think we're going to have with the Chinese. That to me sort of became, I don't like to say a conspiracy theory, but everything now, it's May 15th right now. Everything that I kind of thought was going to happen seems to be actually happening in motion. So, for example, you guys, people that are into SFABs, which are the Security Force Assistance Brigades, they just got announced this past Friday. They're going to shut down the 4th SFAB out here in Fort Carson, Colorado, and also the 54th SFAB, which I believe is in Indiana. It's a National Guard unit. What has me concerned is the fact that, or not concerned, but what actually bores out in this article and my conspiracy theory that Elbridge Colby is doing all this is the fact he has been so against us having a footprint in Europe. Well, guess what 4th SFAB does? Advising in Europe. So the fact that they're being deactivated, and the 54th SFAB is a National Guard unit, they basically augment all the SFAB missions, tells me this is definitely Elbridge Colby that's pulling a lot of the strings behind everything. And the fact that you're hearing ruminations about reducing the American military footprint in EUCOM by 80 to 90%, that again speaks to that's Elbridge Colby pulling the strings. Yeah. And he has one of the highest level policy jobs of the Pentagon right now. So again, to me, this all seems to be, we're pushing everything back to the Western Hemisphere. Again, we're going after the drug cartels. It sounds like we're actually getting way more interested in trying to get the minerals and mines out of Chinese hands in South America. The other big thing that's already been talked about, and I was like, holy crap, this is all kind of becoming sort of a Trumpian Monroe Doctrine, is it sounds like there's even talks now about trying to convince the Argentinians to get the Chinese space base out of Argentina. I don't know if you guys, if you or any of your listeners are aware, the Chinese actually have like a Space Force base in the middle of Argentina. It's basically out by Patagonia, basically. But, it's all about trying to get control over the Western Hemisphere again and pushing out the Russians and Chinese. And this is where, if there is like a grand bargain or grand strategy going on here, it seems like, again, it's the Monroe Doctrine. So Western Hemisphere to the shores of China, which is, as the U.S. is going to become less and less interested in trying to dictate the affairs of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, it's because we want to throw everything at Asia. And right now, again, with Trump in the Middle East with his team, everything he seems to be saying is, we're getting out of here, but we're going to sell you a bunch of things. And by a bunch of things, it sounds like they're probably F-35s more, basically you're going to buy a bunch of American military equipment and we're going to let you have more control over the Middle East while the U.S. essentially pulls out. And the same thing going on in EUCOM and AFRICOM is, it seems to be, we're just going to basically abandon those places at this point. And if anybody wants to have any notions of security cooperation or any sort of, side benefits of being under the, the nuclear umbrella with the U.S., I think it's going to come down to how much stuff are you buying from America? Okay. So I don't want to say this is sort of a brave new world, but this is just, being very cold about it. Is this seems to be, again, I wrote this over 2-3 months. This seems to be coming to fruition. Everything that I put into this article, the original, but also the one that ended up at ASPI, the strategist website.
Okay. So I got 2 follow-ups. One's a really nerdy question about the Monroe Doctrine comparison. The other one's an Obama comparison. I'm guessing I'm probably going to skip the Monroe Doctrine one just for time. But before I do, just for folks listening, so SFABs, Security Force Assistance Brigades, were a unique creation in the United States Army that General Milley really championed. And the idea there was to allow specialized brigades in the Army to go overseas and do security force assistance and advise with foreign militaries, while our regular brigade combat team stayed at home and actually trained for great power competition. So They're very much a outgrowth of and an adaptation to the global war on terror footing that we were on at the time. So seeing those brigades being cut or reallocated definitely signals a massive shift, at least on the Army side, in how we're approaching our persistent presence across the globe.
Well, and what's even more important about it is Big Army never really wanted these things.
No. I remember doing the SFAT mission.
Yeah.
It was bad.
Yeah. And, like for anyone that doesn't know much about this, when you think of like a brigade, you think of 2,000 people. The SFABs were only actually supposed to be manned at 855 Army soldiers. The problem is the manning never actually reached that. It was usually about 500 to 600. And guess what? Other guidance just came out essentially also right before that announcement of the two SFABs being deactivated, that their manning now is essentially capped at 500 military personnel. What does that mean? They're probably all going to be manned at 300 to 400 people, if that.
Yep. Yeah. No mannings. Yeah. Well, here's a cool thing. Now I'm off on a tangent on SFABs, but I think they're one of the coolest inventions the Army had in GWAT, so I'll talk about it. One cool thing about the SFABs, too, is that they were dual purpose. So to do counterinsurgency fight, you got to do a lot of advisory. So we were taking regular Army units and shrinking them down into small deployable SFAT, Security Force Assistance Teams, and sending them overseas. Problem there is that you have the brigade cut up. Yep. So you have half of it doing advising, half of it doing nothing. They're not actually getting good at what brigade combat teams are supposed to do, which is close with and destroy the enemy.
Large scale
at
combat
scale.
operations.
Exactly. It's the worst of all worlds. So by creating the SFABs, you did two things. One is that you created a unit dedicated to that, so brigade combat teams could focus on large scale ground operations. But as part of the transition to great power competition, if you had to surge forces into the regular Army, you can do a mass mobilization and train a bunch of privates and get them through basic training and arm them, equip them, and get them into the force. But where are the sergeants, the lieutenants, the captains, the lieutenant colonels, the majors, all those mid-career professionals? So it was a retaining pool for mid-career talent so that the Army could surge capacity if needed.
Yeah, and the third most important thing about them is it isn't just for COIN and CT and GWAT era stuff anymore. Mm-hmm. Like their real value is actually enabling allies and partners to do warfighting on behalf of our national interest, and the level of interoperability you can basically bake into an allied or partner military if you have SFAB advisors on the ground, working with them, doing all the unsexy things that soft and green berets don't want to do. And the best quote I have on this was talking to actually a fourth SFAB advisor. He basically told me, one of like the most, I guess he was basically saying, whenever I get asked, how come we can't just have like the 10th Mountain guys across the street or the Green Beret guys do this? So like, we do things that they would never do. And he gave me an example of hanging out with the Romanian captain for 2 weeks, teaching him how to use Microsoft Excel, because they needed to figure out a way to get them to do better maintenance and logistics and supply chain stuff for military exercises and maneuvers. And just by sitting with the guy for 2 weeks, they were able to basically teach this guy to use Excel to, do things that, again, we take for granted from the U.S. military side, but he was able to teach them this. And so as I've talked to so many SFAB advisors, another sort of big thing that comes out about that interoperability is the fact that a lot of people don't realize that at the combatant command level, when you make war plan assumptions for, what may happen in this region or this part of the world, what forces can we assume the U.S. can bring to the fight, and what forces do we assume allies and partners can bring to the fight? U.S. planners actually use a 5-to-1 rule when it comes to assuming the combat power and effectiveness of an allied or partner military force. And by that, I mean the 5-to-1 rule, which is we usually assume that 5 brigades of a foreign military are equal to 1 U.S. combat brigade. And it maybe sounds a little bit sort of, I'm searching for the word that I like to say, or like to be polite, but it is, it is.
It sounds like we're being dicks, egotistical dicks.
Yeah. But that's just the way we assume our allies and partners are going to fight. And SFAB advisors will always tell you our job is to get that 5-to-1 ratio as close as possible to a 1-to-1 ratio. Will we ever achieve it with like the Romanian military or, Estonia? No. But can we get them maybe 3-to-1 or 2-to-1? That is, I think, a great investment in enabling partner interoperability, so that in a future conflict, you can have them actually be more capable than they should be. And also you're not worrying about them, accidentally doing blue on blue or green on green accidents, because that's usually a big problem too. When I talk to any SFAB advisors is, hey, we do a military exercise with this foreign military. We actually are killing ourselves more than the enemy is actually killing us in these exercises. So what do? We fix and identify all the ways we can get a foreign military to not do dumb things like that. And we, again, make them more effective for the next fight.
Yeah.
So And again, as an Air Force pilot, I hope your audience realizes I'm like probably the biggest Army SFAB advocate, which is probably bizarre.
Mm-hmm. No, the philosophy behind the unit's construction was so well thought out. Now,
yes,
you can always debate, force structure and, how many do you need? Where do they need to be aligned? All that sort of stuff. So I'm also not in a position to criticize the decision to cut certain units. It's a resource constrained environment. But just in principle, though, it was a phenomenal adaptation to both let the regular Army focus on great power competition while fulfilling our GWAT obligations, and then also creating that strategic reserve of talent so that if we had to surge for an actual near-peer fight, that we could.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so my big fear now is they've already gone after these two SFABs, and it sounds like the SFAC, which is a Security Force Assistance Command, which is at Fort Liberty / Fort Bragg there in Carolina. That's going to basically be dissolved and pushed into U.S. FORCECOM. And it's going to have a staff of 20 military and 16 civilians, which, again, indicates this is how you basically strangle SFA in the U.S. Army is you diminish it, you cut it, and you understaff it, underman it, under-resource it. And then 5 years later, you're like, why do we even have these things? They're not effective anymore.
Yeah. Well, the weird thing there, too, is like you can – it sounds strange, but you almost need the bureaucratic overhead at the command level to maintain the agency of an organization in something as large as the Department of Defense. And that's almost more important than running the ground troops at 50% manning if it's actually aligned with what the different geographic combat commanders' campaign plans are.
Yeah.
Because otherwise people forget what it's for, why it's there. There's no executive oversight. And you just have this brain drain of knowledge about how and why we created this thing in the first place.
Yep. And
so that part is kind of concerning.
What's even more upsetting, and again, the conspiracy hat, tinfoil hat's coming back on here again, is if we actually view these things as important and valuable, okay, fine, you have to cut the UCOM one, but you should take the remaining advisors in that SFAB unit and surge them into the Indo-Pacific one, which is up there at Joint Base Lewis McChord. I believe that's the second SFAB, I believe. I don't know. Is it or the fifth?
It's definitely the one aligned with Indo-Pacific. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Here, I'll look at it. I want to make sure I'm not. It is fifth SFAB. My apologies. Okay. I usually know that off the top of my head. I don't know why I couldn't remember that second.
No.
Yeah, it's fifth SFAB.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a good lead in too, because we're talking about, Trump's focus on China and the surge of resources into the Indo-Pacific. But, back when Obama was president, he talked about the Asian pivot and pivoting all of America's national security focus to the Indo-Pacific. So I'm just kind of curious, is what Trump is doing really new national security policy for the U.S., or is it just continuation of a longer trend? How much of this is a substance difference in what we've done before? And how much is this just Trump having his own unique brand of, let's call it marketing?
I place a lot of this on Elbridge Colby. Elbridge Colby is, if you Google him, he has been one of the most consistent doctrinaire thinkers, because he was a much lower level appointee in Trump 1.0. In Trump 2.0, as far as I'm concerned, he is the most important person in the Department of Defense right now,
really?
As far as I'm concerned. Because he's
I don't think I've heard his name on a single news outlet since Trump's been elected.
That's because he's smart enough to not to not open his mouth anymore now, because he is making major decisions throughout the entire Pentagon that is going to obviously piss off people in Congress. When you're talking about shutting down an SFAB unit in Indiana, that's a National Guard unit. That's going to piss people off. It's going to piss off.
That's big money for that district.
Yeah. It's going to piss off, obviously, all elected representatives here in Colorado that they're going to lose an SFAB here. It's not like it's being replaced with anything. So that's obviously very concerning. So honestly, it all comes down, again, in my opinion, it's all Elbridge Colby. Everything that you're basically seeing when it comes to the Indo-Pacific pivot actually finally happening right now, it's Elbridge Colby. Now, the asterisk to all this, of course, is CENTCOM and the Houthis, right? We're seeing all.
We just cut a ceasefire with the Houthis. That's over with, right? That's done. Put a pin in it. Move on.
I guess so.
Heard. Israel's mad about it because they're not involved, but we're good.
Yeah, I guess so. The problem, of course, is we're hearing the reports about again, just how many expensive PGMs, precision guided munitions, we wasted on the Houthis.
I'm not sure if Doge has gotten to that yet.
Yeah, and it's not just like, okay, we spent over $1 billion on all these PGMs that were dropping on these basically third world insurgent army people with crappy weapons, but the fact that these things take a long time to build, a lot of these PGMs, and what's even more complicating about it is a lot of these long range missiles and air defense missiles that we need for the Indo-Pacific fight, they take a long time to build, partly because they require such exotic minerals and rare earths that it complicates the cost and the issues in the supply chain networks. Because guess what? China's no longer allowing export of any of these minerals and rare earths to the U.S. anymore. So we want to build. So we basically depleted our stocks on these really good long range like munitions that we need for the Indo-Pacific fight. And we don't have the minerals to make them anymore.
Interesting.
And there's already a bunch of unclassed war games that have been done about what happens in a fight with China, and everything basically shows the U.S. running out of what remaining long-range weapon stocks we have in less than a week.
So what you're saying is that maybe the other place where there's a lot of rare earth minerals, namely certain parts of Africa,
yes,
we should perhaps have better relationships with and more persistent engagement with, and maybe don't cut that SFAB.
Yeah, and that SFAB has not been cut yet. But if you went after UCOM, then you should probably go after AFRICOM. In terms of the mineral stuff, and that, and I had written a separate article about this. Actually, I started writing it back in November, December about the U.S. If Trump is president again. I think I started writing it after he got elected back in November. That I had a feeling that the U.S. was going to move towards sort of like a minerals for military assistance model. And lo and behold, like the prophecy comes true, because what does the Trump admin do with the Ukraine? They force them into a minerals deal, like for continued military support. So the article actually came out at the New Lines Think Tank Institute actually in early April, which again, it was a peer-reviewed article, so it was fascinating to write this thing basically back in November, and a week before it got published, we had to like, hey, we need to update this article because the prophecy came true.
Wow, don't you love it when that happens?
Yeah,
that happened to me one time, but I was writing about the future of Afghanistan after we pulled out, and between when I wrote it and when it was published, Kabul fell. So the print edition went out without edits, but the online one was able to get fixed.
Nice, yeah, and I'm actually glad you mentioned that too, because that reminds me, Afghanistan has at least $1 trillion worth of lithium. I could see the Trump admin trying to make a play with them, because the Chinese are investing a ton of money into Afghanistan, like for mining copper and lithium. Again, the U.S. needs a lot of that, and again, this pushes us back to the Monroe Doctrine concept, the fact that China controls so many mines in South America that, again, this pushes the idea of, can the U.S. push out the Chinese and also the Russians in certain parts of South America, again, as part of a broader Monroe type of doctrine thing under the Trump admin. So I have a feeling this is where it's going to keep sort of trending. The problem, of course, is when it comes to getting minerals out of Africa, the Biden admin actually had begun this project called the Libido Corridor in tandem with the European Union. It sounds like that's probably dead. The whole point of the Libido Corridor was to essentially get minerals and rare earths out of the middle of Central Africa area. So basically like the DRC. It sounds like that's basically dead now, that project. And it was supposed to be a good counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. So I guess that, I'm trying to be as apolitical as humanly possible here, but I'm just seeing a lot of penny wise, pound foolish types of decisions being made right now. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned a few times the reduction in our engagement with Europe and UCOM. What does all this foretell for our relationship with Russia? Because one of the points you brought up in the article was a potential deal with Russia to, have better relationships in return for lifting of sanctions. Fun thought there, though, is that sanctions we put on them don't really seem to bother Russia at all. They seem to be doing fine in spite of our sanctions. So I'm just curious, what does that relationship with Russia reset actually look like? What's going on?
So I'm glad you mentioned sanctions, because when we talk about it at the Naval War College, it's a fun lesson to teach because I love to basically tell everyone sanctions don't work, but they do work. Now, the reason why I say they don't work is because in a globalist capitalist society, if you want to get some minerals or rare earths or electronics or basically any goods and services, you will always find a third party or fourth party to basically sort of act as a broker middleman, right? So you will find a businessman in Lebanon or UAE or Oman or Ethiopia or Gambia that will buy whatever you need, repackage it, and deliver it to you. So that's how sanctions don't work. Now, sanctions do work because this takes time and money. So you're going to spend more time trying to get things that you're not able to get directly anymore. And the economic impact is the fact that you're having to pay the middlemen essentially extra fees. So anything you're trying to build or do now just becomes a little bit more time consuming and a little bit more costly. Mm-hmm. So that's in one sense, sanctions do work because it does over time. It takes away efficiency and it takes away money. So it does actually degrade your economy over time.
Does that work in a country like Russia where, the prosperity of the people at the top isn't really tied to the prosperity of the people at the bottom? And by that, I mean the political regime in charge of Russia, Putin and all his best buddies. It doesn't really matter how difficult things get for the Russian people. Their power base isn't threatened. So when you're dealing with a country like Russia, what effect does putting sanctions on or taking them off even mean if you're trying to influence the actual stakeholders who make decisions? Because it seems to be very insulated from the impact of those sanctions.
Well, again, and this is where the long-term view is really important. It is basically destroying the long-term viability of the Russian state and economy, and its society. The biggest thing that's happening with that is the fact that they're having to sell all of their oil and natural gas to India and China. And since India and China both have Russia over the barrel, they're only paying about 30 to 40 cents on the dollar for all of this. So what does that mean? The amount of money that your country should have been taking in, you're losing well over half of it. So again, your coffers, while still pretty full, you're just not able to, invest in education, healthcare. You can't do as much for your military. Are the elites in power still able to be rich? Yes, but now they're just not going to be as rich, but they still get to be rich. It just, it has more of the trickle down effect on the rest of the Russian economy and Russian people. So it does, again, it's doing so much damage. Like every single economist is saying that 3 years into the war, the Russians have sacrificed the next two to three generations of Russians because all the money that is supposed to be there for, education, healthcare, other social services is now gone.
You brought up a fun point there too about the way to make sanctions work is consistency over the long haul. One fun thing with Trump is that it's very hard to describe him as consistent with anything.
Yeah.
So, and some of the things, and I'm very sympathetic to this argument personally, but some of the things that his supporters will say is that, the madman theory of politics. If he's so crazy, no one knows what he might do, then they'll play nice with him. I'm not sure I'd pursue that as a policy personally, but it is entertaining to watch. With that, we've seen him go out into the world and really break almost every relationship we've had built with every country, including close allies, over the past 70 some odd years. Do you think what he's doing is working? Do you think the rest of the world's going to have the same relationship with us after this administration is out of office? Do you think that we've done our own, or that he's done irreparable harm to America's standing in the world? What does American national security look like when it has to exist without the Trump administration after the rest of the world's seen what we've allowed to happen?
Well, I don't even have to give my own personal opinion or view on this because a poll just came out just a week or two ago that basically found that in the last 3 or 4 months, net positive favorability from countries all over the world of America versus China. China is now viewed more favorably by most of the world compared to the U.S. now. I mean, that to me is a major impact when most of the world now actually views China more favorably than the U.S. That's highly problematic. People, I guess it's one of those things like, American soft power is something that you don't know how great it is until it's gone, or at least people don't, around the world don't view you as great as you once were. And that's highly problematic. And I mean, already the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, actually made a comment about like America, about soft power. He's like, you can't shoot soft power, blah, blah, blah. Like, so, honorary Hegseth does not believe in soft power. And to the point about the madman theory, while I do believe like the madman theory is I don't say a good idea to be a wild card per se. Doing that also means you have to be incredibly intelligent yourself and have a great understanding of history and diplomacy and international relations to even have a chance at pulling that off. I unfortunately do not believe that dear glorious leader has said skills.
Gotcha.
I've yet to see any interaction again by dear glorious leader that indicates that he has a fantastic and comprehensive understanding of diplomacy and international affairs.
So there's a bunch of fun places to go after that. But you brought up soft power and you brought up Pete Hegseth. So let's talk about soft power, and let's look at the change between the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration. Because in the first Trump administration, we start off with Jim Mattis, one of the most respected American military officers in the modern era, bar none. I mean, you can argue for other folks, but you can't argue without him on the list.
I have a buddy who named his son Mattis in honor of.
That's weird. Your buddy needs to see a psychiatrist. That is weird, but
no. Here's the best part. He actually sent a letter to Mattis saying he named his son, and Mattis actually responded to him with
saying, "What is wrong with you? It's a terrible name."
No. Mattis actually wrote my buddy back, Josh. I'm not going to say his last name, but my buddy Josh named his son Mattis because he loves James Mattis that much.
All right, well, your buddy Josh needs help, but that's a separate podcast. That's not this show. Anyway, how did his wife sign off with it? No, I don't want to know. It's not this show. I'm going to get to my question. God damn it. All right, focus, Scott. Focus. All right, so we were talking about soft power, transition between administrations. Okay, we went from administration number one, Jim Mattis in charge of the DOD, and he's somewhat famous for talking about the power of intimidation and the power of inspiration. And he would really lean hard on inspiration. And that's even something he talked about in his first interview with Trump, where Trump walks out of the room and goes, "Oh my God, this guy's the real deal." And we all know, like, Mattis is coming to the White House and the Pentagon. That's happening. Then he resigns and goes on his way. And now we have Pete Hegseth in charge, who just said all the lovely things that you just discussed about how you can't shoot soft power. But it's easier to find a trigger man if you do have soft power. Anyway, that's the Green Beret me thinking. So what is different between the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration in regards to foreign policy? And my suspicion is it has mostly to do with the people around him. Because Trump is many things. He doesn't appear to be a deep thinker, but he is a masterful communicator, and he really feels the vibes better than probably any politician we have in America.
Yeah, it was most obvious when he talked to the Saudis yesterday, and he just talked to the Qataris today.
Yeah.
When he's saying all kinds of things that no other president would ever say, but he's basically saying all the nation builders and interventionists were all fools. Look at you Saudis and Qataris. You guys did this from the ground up yourselves. Like, know,
the whole guy knows how to feel. The guy knows how to feel out a room.
Yeah.
And you mentioned too, like Elbridge Colby in their influencing policy. So I'm trying to figure out, like, what's the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2? And where does that difference come from? Is it an evolution in his thinking, or is it just a new cast of characters?
Oh, it is a completely different cast of characters, with the random exceptions like Elbridge Colby, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. There's a few others I can't think of off the top of my head, but those are two notable sort of personalities. Honestly, it really comes down to the fact that the Trump 1.0 had way more sort of technocrats and bureaucrats and accomplished professionals in the administration. Even though a lot of them had been warned that, hey, you do realize serving in this Trump admin may damage your professional reputation and legacy and career. A lot of people that did decide to serve in Trump 1.0 were like, no, I will find a way to, convince Trump and his little cadre of loyalists. Okay, you want to say this, but this is what we should do to achieve the end state you seem to be talking about. And of course, as you saw, was it like 90% of these people all had to resign at some point a year or 2 or 3 years in because they couldn't do it anymore because it was becoming exhausting. The reason why I tell you all that is because Trump 2.0, they have had a lot of trouble getting any competent professionals, bureaucrats, or technocrats to serve this admin because no one wants to touch this anymore now. So if you are getting a job in this admin, you're either trying to lie to yourself about the fact that you can do a really good job and not have it blemish your life or career, or you're just completely into sort of the full MAGA doctrine, MAGA Kool-Aid approach to the world and domestic politics. That's all I basically see at this point. And the fact that I know that, I guess I can tell you this. I haven't really told anybody this, but it's unfortunate that I'm hearing about a few military officers, that if you are as a part of sort of of these high level sort of transition teams that are interfacing a lot with a lot of the Trump appointees, you're basically being given like a loyalty test of essentially asking a military officer, what do you think happened on January 6th? And depending on how you answer January 6th as a question, that determines whether or not you get a job or not.
Yeah.
So that to me is probably the greatest sort of defining factor of what's going on at this point. I guess loyalty over professionalism, I suppose.
Yeah, asking for loyalty tests for military officers is definitely a very concerning development in any democratic society.
Yeah.
What's your sense? Because you've got a family in America, you served America, you teach students, the upcoming generation of leaders in the military. The national security community is a very closed off group. It's hard to get into. Once you're in, you can't leave. Once you leave, you're out. So there are, I don't want to say incestuous relationships, but very close-knit relationships. And there is a streak of being apolitical so you can serve multiple administrations and, serve the grand strategy of the American public, whatever that might be. But what do you think it is about that community and its essentially failure to communicate effectively with the American public that has made so many people comfortable with an administration like Trump's coming in and doing the things that they're doing? Because I don't want to say they're causing irrevocable harm because we don't know what the outcomes of their decisions are going to be yet. And who knows, they might be right on the money. Time will tell. But they are changing things in ways that can't be undone. They're ringing bells that we'll never unhear. So why do you think that after 20 years of global war on terror, in this whole generation of people that have gone through that public service, that the American people turn around and go, yep, Trump's our guy. Screw all these other folks?
That's the issue too, is the fact that multiple administrations basically lied to the American people about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the media, the lamestream media, as Dear Glorious Leader likes to call sometimes, did take part in that lying and did not have as much of the critical thought and discussions that were necessary on this. And I guess this, it is disheartening to, like to me, who I guess I would consider myself, sort of a national security professional, to sort of see the damage being done to the American reputation globally, and sort of like relationships and partnerships that the U.S. has had with lots of allies and partners, becoming very sort of volatile, and creating, the image and perception and problem issue of, okay, whoever is president next, be it from the left or the right for America, can we depend on America anymore to be sort of like a stable world leader? And everything that seems to be happening at this point, and again, this takes us back to the article, is U.S. leadership seems intent and bent on the idea of breaking the U.S.-led international system, the liberal rules-based order, whatever you want to call it. But the way the world is organized at this point is essentially intentionally being broken under what I believe is sort of a false premise of the U.S. is paying for everything and subsidizing everything, without, again, taking into account the long-term payoff of everyone does exchanges in U.S. dollars, which allows the U.S. to carry a $36 trillion plus national debt. We get away with that because the entire world essentially has to use the American dollar for transactions. So us being the standard reserve currency is because the U.S. sort of is the de facto superpower, Team America, the world police, et cetera, because of these, short-term, I guess you could say, losses that we take in terms of trade and, other types of deals. It's basically, if you keep the long-term view of, we don't want Russia or China or any other country to be sort of the standard go-to country for currency and things like that, then everything always ends up benefiting the U.S. in the end, right? Mm-hmm. There's a reason why when there's any sort of global economic catastrophe, economically, when markets, go down and fail and crush, most people, most countries take their money and put it into the U.S. system. Now, I guess that'll be sort of the $1 trillion question is, when we have our next global financial meltdown, will investors around the world continue to dump their money, pull their money out of Russia, China, or Europe or Africa or South America and dump it into the U.S. economy and the U.S. markets? That to me will be, the litmus test of if the U.S. has actually done irreparable damage. So to do its soft power image, and if you hear about countries talking about doing transactions in currencies other than the dollar, that also to me is a big red flag of the U.S. has basically, again, done things that's penny wise but pound foolish.
So one of the most interesting things I've read about the current trade wars and Trump's tariffs is that the concerning part about Trump's tariffs and what he proposed and why he actually put the 90-day pause in and backed off pretty quick, is that it wasn't a brilliant negotiating strategy. It's because they were watching the U.S. bond market. And when they were putting tariffs in place, people weren't fleeing the stock market and going to U.S. bonds. People were fleeing the stock market and going anywhere else. And then Japan was coming out saying that they're going to dump U.S. debt and crash the value of U.S. American bonds, which would not just tank the stock market. That would take the entire economy. Like payroll would be worthless. Housing prices everything goes at that point. And that's actually what drove him to put the 90-day pause in effect and start talking about all these deals. So I feel like we've almost run that thought experiment. But one thing I got to think about is that America's a pretty resilient place. And it almost seems silly that one president could show up and in, 100 days in office, 4-year term, whatever time frame you'll look at, and screw all this up. So I wonder, is Trump the inevitable outcome of changing forces in the world? Because America's still the most powerful country, but we're no longer a standalone global hegemon. We did squander 20 years in GWAT, blood, sweat, treasure, reputation. That was Bush, Obama, everybody. So is Trump the inevitable outcome of a series of bad decisions that started 20 some odd years ago? Or is he actually the one breaking the house down? Because it almost seems like he's the guy that showed up with the match and threw it on a house that was already doused in gasoline.
Yeah, no, I love you asked that because that's also an awesome debate we always have in class at the Naval War College. I usually come down on the side of Trump is the symptom, not the disease. And so I'm glad you mentioned the GWAT and everything we did the last 2 decades. I usually come down on the fact that the decision to invade Iraq in 2003 was sort of the beginning of the end. In terms of that's what really broke the international order. I think kind of like the final nail in the coffin on sort of, like the U.S. led international system to me, typically when I have this debate is in 2011 when the United Nations passed the no-fly zone, like for Libya, and Russia and China both surprisingly abstained. I was actually at the KAOK in Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. It was a planner. We all woke up the next day super shocked and surprised that the United Nations actually approved it because we figured Russia and China would veto it at the UN Security Council. And the fact that we then started getting told this no-fly zone is actually now turning into, per Hillary Clinton's words, a no-drive zone, which, as anyone that is a fan of 2011 Libyan history, the U.S., the French, and the Brits essentially sort of became the de facto air power for the rebels for regime change in Libya. So, if you're looking for a period of the death, it basically is 2003 to 2011. A lot of bad, dumb decisions were made. And the Chinese and Russians, I would argue, contend after 2011 basically decided the United Nations is broken, doesn't work anymore, and now we can start doing things that violate the international order because if the Americans can do it, we can do it. And guess what starts happening after 2011? China starts building its fake islands. Russia gets way, way more involved in Ukrainian politics and other neighboring countries in a way that they hadn't done previously. So as far as I'm dead, I guess you could say the official death of the international system was 2011. It just took having President Trump as president the first time and now the second time around for him to basically acknowledge and recognize it's over.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And there's a lot there to unpack. I'll ask you this, and this will be a closing thought, I think, because I'm watching the clock and we're coming up on time.
Yeah. And dude, if you want to have me on more often, I'm down to have these chats more often.
Oh yeah, no, we can talk more. This has been a lot of fun. But my final question is going to be. Question to you is going to actually be about the national security establishment. By that, I just mean not the deep space, but the community of people that are sincere practitioners of this. Because I remember I was part of that generation. I commissioned to the Army in 2012.
Yeah,
I'm part of that generation of soldiers who joined an army at war to go to war, and we essentially missed the war. Like, we are that generation. I wrote an article about this too. I'll bridging the gap from the Green Notebook.
I'm sorry you missed it. As an Air Force pilot, I have my Iraq and Afghan campaign medals.
Well, I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan. I backpacked through northern Iraq when I was studying abroad in Turkey as a student in college. And then for Afghanistan, I was there at the very end, 2020 to 2021. And, January 6th happened. I'm sitting there at Bagram Air Force Base. But I remember what it's like I was in the Special Operations Captain's Career Course down at what was then Fort Bragg, and now it's Fort Bragg again. It was Fort Liberty for a bit. We'll see what happens in a few years.
Yeah, I know.
Trump gets elected, and we're all like, oh, my God, this is crazy. I remember being in isolation for planning, and we hear that he gets to Pennsylvania. Like, hey, we're waking up tomorrow, and Trump's going to be the president-elect. And then I remember going through the election cycle while I'm in Afghanistan, and it's Trump versus Biden, and Biden wins. And obviously, folks feel what they feel, but a lot of the establishment felt like, oh, thank God Biden's here, which means we're staying. I'm like, Biden never wanted us to Afghanistan. Like, Afghanistan's over, and the entire deployment, we're supposed to be shutting things down. But
exactly,
the entire chain of command can't acknowledge, like, they're going through an existential crisis in real time. Like, this is actually over. Like, the American people don't want us here anymore. It's different now.
Oh, yeah. No.
At Bagram Airfield on January 6th happened. So, like, my question is, why the hell can the people that are supposed to be professionals about this not pull their heads out of the ass and see which way the wind's going? Because it almost seems like you almost need a Trump-like figure to show up because the community of professionals is so divorced from the will of the people. And I'm not sure how to fix that or rectify it, but that does seem to be a genuine gap.
Oh no, that's a fantastic point. I mean, first off, as far as I'm concerned, Congress is broken.
Oh yeah.
Congress is broken. Like lobbyists and special interest groups, Congress is broken at this point. I mean, if you try to email or call your congressman or your senator, you get a generic email response or, response on the phone. They have a checklist and they're like, oh, okay. I guarantee you, if anybody in Colorado or Indiana writes somebody in Congress or in the Senate about their SFAB being deactivated, they will get a generic response about, thank you for caring and worrying about U.S. national security. Mm-hmm. So that to me is a major problem already at this point. So yeah, Congress is broken. I do agree with you about the fact that sort of like the national security establishment writ large is broken as well, but it's because there's just been a lack of accountability. I kind of wish way more sort of like appointees and generals and admirals would be publicly held to account for obscuring information on various wars or trying to sort of cover up a lot of what's been going on in our various wars and conflicts. And I realize there's always that era of like, well, we have to, obviously protect things that are classified or, that are a part of national security interests. But the lack of accountability, I think, is what gets me consistently is, I mean, I don't know you, Scott. I always chuckle a lot, like whenever I have to read a bio or, I encounter a speaker or or come across a bio where they brag about their time about being in Iraq or Afghanistan, in command of forces that trained, advise, and equip the Iraqis or Afghans. I just get a good chuckle out of that. I'm like, I would not put that on my bio.
It's like, really, you're the consultant for the company that went bankrupt. How lovely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, you were never held accountable. I mean, again, I was in Afghanistan in 2020. I mean, I knew what was, so I was in Kandahar. I wasn't at Bagram. I was at Kandahar.
Okay.
January.
Yeah, I was at Bagram on January 6th, but I actually spent my deployment up at Mez.
So I just missed that in. So I got to Kandahar January 27th, and I only know that because an E-11 crashed that day. It's also the same day that Kobe's helicopter crashed. And I was going to Kandahar to be an E-11 Bacon pilot. So yeah, I got there in January of 2020 and was there until early October, obviously because COVID kept me there. But the 205th Afghan National Army Corps was at Kandahar. And it was just, it amazed me sort of like the diluted reports that I would see coming out, speaking way too positively about the 205th ANA Corps versus the reality of when I would just go talk to an Army officer or SFAB there. And they're like, no, It's terrible. It's bad.
No, I remember when the Taliban launched a huge offensive towards the end and they were trying to pull the Americans out, and the guys of action, the 205th, came up on the horn in the Green Berets like, if we leave here, this corps ceases to exist. We need to stand here and not point a gun to anyone's heads, but like shame them into doing their jobs. Yeah, otherwise, you just assume this is over because they're gone as soon as we leave.
I think you and your listeners would actually love this. So in the summer of 2020, a rumor went rampant across the 205th ANA Corps there that as a part of one of the secret appendices of the U.S. inter-Afghan Taliban agreement that was signed on 29 Feb 2020 was that the Taliban would be integrated into the 205th Corps in the summer of 2021. It went rampant.
Well, in a way, they were actually kind of right.
I know. That's what. Yeah, because the 205th Corps in the final days at Kandahar, they did not fight the Taliban. They did. They hunkered down and made a deal of like, hey, should we really bother?
So
yeah.
Now, I will say this. I can't. Actually, I can't comment on that. Never mind.
I was going to say, yeah.
Never mind. I can't talk about that. Never mind. Okay.
No. The one last thing we can't talk about, because this was on class, was that, and I'm glad you mentioned about the national security establishment thinking that they could force Biden's hand in Afghanistan. While I was there in Kandahar as a part of the retrograde, instead of pulling out all of the MQ-9s that were at Kandahar, I think we spent almost $1 billion transferring them to Camp Dwyer, about 100 miles west, and building infrastructure and fiber optic cables to build up a new magical base, because the belief was we could have a Litecoin CT footprint with drones at Camp Dwyer in a sort of a pull-out, once we pull out of Afghanistan. That's
a whole nother, oh, God, sorry.
No.
We were doing similar stuff up north with the State Department. It was so fucking frustrating. Yeah. Because just it made, oh, God, that's a whole other show. Okay.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the fucking State Department, because they were telling us that I couldn't tell the Afghan airport manager when we were actually leaving Kandahar. And the reason why I know all this as well is I was there as the E-11 Bacon Pot, but because of COVID, they made me the airfield commander. They're like, hey, you're a lieutenant colonel with, just flying airplanes. There's no more lieutenant colonels left. You want to be in charge of the airfield? And I'm like, we weren't asking, we're telling you. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was annoying. I'm glad you mentioned even like the fucking State Department thing. I got so pissed off when they told me you can't tell them when we're going to leave Kandahar. And by the way, you can't give them any stuff to help them run the airfield. So I'm like, what about like the 40 Toyota Hiluxes? You need to destroy them. How about like the dozen MRAPs? No, you need to fucking destroy them. You can't give them to the Afghans here. And I'm like, stupid.
Yep. We'll have to talk sometime, not when we're recording about that.
Dude, you want to have me on again?
Yeah, I know. We'll talk more. No, but I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. Love the article. Love the honest take on Trump's foreign policy. Even though I still think it's kind of funny to think that Trump has a coherent foreign policy, because he has many things, but a consistent thinker is not one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Last question.
All right.
If you got to sit down with Trump and put a bug in his ear, and it'd be something that he actually took seriously, what would you put as a bug in Trump's ear with the expectation that he actually took it seriously for national security?
Oh, man. I mean, besides Trump, I don't want to say that either. Damn.
Oh, come on. So apparently that's the right answer. Say it.
No. Say it. I mean, I could be a smartass and say you should hire me, because I don't care.
Never hire someone from the Air Force. That's a bad idea.
Honestly, I wish he could get. I guess honestly, I would say he needs to find a way to hire a cadre of professional technocrats and bureaucrats, and he needs to let them actually do what's in the best interest of the U.S., especially in the long term. And there's just a lot of things that, at a personal but also a professional level, I don't like that is currently going on. And I don't know, the U.S. again needs to keep playing the long game. And right now it just seems like everything we're doing is just for short-term interest and short-term gain. So I guess, you know what, if I had to tell them one thing, I'd say you need to have a grand strategy that is coherent so that we all know what you're thinking and what you want the rest of the government and military to do. Because it just seems like every day is a bag of tactics as the strategy or the goalpost move in completely different directions. It's not like they're going further out. They're just moving completely different directions now. So I think that's that. Like we just need we need just a coherent direction that the U.S. needs to be going, other than just the world's ripping us off and now it's our time to get rich and get ours. So.
Okay.
I know that was more than one thing, probably. I don't know.
Well, no, just a comment that I said something that he would actually take seriously, and clearly he would never take that seriously. But I digress.
Yeah.
Well, hey, man, appreciate you coming on. Good luck with all the MAGA pitchforks that are coming your way, since you just said that Trump should hire the technocrats and bureaucrats back. But appreciate your time,
but
man.
Accountability needs to be a part of all this. Accountability? Yeah.
There's a great signal chat about accountability.
No comment.
No comment? All right. Delete that message. All right.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Let's do it again if you want. So
absolutely.
Awesome, brother.
For everyone listening, there will be a link to the article in the show notes. Please go check it out.
Sweet.
Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. If you liked what you heard, please follow the podcast and share with your friends, and even consider going to the support the show link in the episode description. Thank you, and I'll see you all next time.